Hello and welcome to another episode of TLDR's World Leader Leaderboard podcast. I'm your host, Zach Michaelis, and I'm joined by Nadja.
Hello.
Very good. And Rory.
Hello.
Very good.
Congratulations on becoming the host.
I know, what a promotion,
Yeah.
Crazy. Jack is currently away, rubbing shoulders with the billionaires at Davos, so I have taken his place, but hopefully we'll make do. Anyway, I think without further ado, are we going to start with the ups or we start with the downs?
I think we usually start with the ups.
We start with the ups?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we do?
Yeah.
Nice. Real voice of authority there. Roy, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
So who is your big winner of the week?
My big winner of the week, and it feels like a kind of a lazy choice, but it is Donald Trump. It's inauguration day as we film this. He is massively triumphant, as are all the people around him. He did a big rally on Sunday, and everyone who's sort of anyone in that world was there and will be at the inauguration. So that's the sort of obvious reason. But there's two other things that I think are quite good things for him this week or in the last week. Firstly, we had the Gaza ceasefire deal. We could debate. It happened technically under Biden's presidency, but a lot of people sort of attribute the final push and the successful push to Trump's team coming in and sort of, forcing Netanyahu's hand. I think that's a sign, that's a big win for Trump. He's able to say, look, Biden failed to do this for 15 months. I came in and did it before I was even president. Whether or not you agree with that, that's what he's going to say, and that's a sort of PR coup for him. Another PR win for him is the TikTok ban, which I think is a remarkable saga considering the idea of banning TikTok started under Trump, by Trump. We've come a long way from there, and so I don't know if American viewers on TikTok possibly saw their app when TikTok sort of went offline for US users. It said, we're going to work with President Trump to try and fix this, and then I don't know, a day later it said, thanks President Trump, we're back and everything. It's a cynical view is that they're really trying to play up to Trump by doing that, but for the millions and millions of young Americans who use TikTok, their sort of memory of this is going to be something like Biden banned TikTok, Trump brought it back, and I think that's a big win.
He's going to get sort of like Chairman Mao approval ratings from the young voters.
Yeah.
I think that is very, very persuasive, and I think of course, it's very natural to think that Trump's a winner given that his inauguration is. I mean, we're recording this on Monday, so quite literally today.
Yeah.
But then also the Gaza thing is really, and I think it flies against quite a lot of, sort of violates lots of our expectations. I think there was a sense that he was going to be very, very pro-Israel going into it. And the fact that he has, apparently forced Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire deal that's been on the table for at least 6 months is quite something.
But that's not saying that, like, later on down the line, like, his pro-Israel policies will, like, come through. I think maybe this was just kind of like this quick fix ceasefire deal. It was just kind of what's it called? A PR move, not PR move.
No, I think that's legitimate. You could frame it in those terms.
You could.
Yeah, I think he'll probably do something very, very pro-Israel soon enough, whether it's West Bank annexation or something along those lines.
No, I think it's a really good caveat to point out, and I think it's one of those where we'll only have to sort of just wait and see, right? In that there might to convince Netanyahu to agree to a deal that Biden has been offering for 6 months, he must have either wielded a heavier stick or offered a juicier carrot, if that's the right adjective for carrot.
Yeah.
And we'll only find out in a couple of months' time. It might be in a few months' time that I think another option is the US striking Iranian nuclear targets. That's something that was floated a couple of months ago, and it could be that he offered that. And that is sort of pro-Israel in a way. But yeah, I think you're right. It's too early to get a sense of sort of like what his overall Middle East policy is going to be. And what was the other thing? The TikTok thing.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of why you think he might have U-turned on it? Because it was an idea that actually originates under the first Trump presidency.
I think maybe he just saw it as an opportunity to get a really easy win. And I think that it was this weird bipartisan move to sort of, I mean, technically the law didn't ban TikTok. It effectively said ByteDance has to sell TikTok to a US entity effectively, or else it would be shut down. And they chose not to do that, so it got sort of shut down. I think it's just, if you look at it as a game of politics, the Democrats really messed up in that they thought they were sort of joining arms with Republicans to fight off this scary Chinese threat, when actually Republicans under Trump turned around not long later and just said, actually, no, we're going to
Do you think that the Republicans win politically here?
I don't really know. I wonder if it's all a bit overblown. Like, I don't think the impact of it. I don't think we'll know the actual impact of it until further down the line. But I think it's a win for Trump, definitely.
You do?
I think so.
You don't think it makes him look a little bit sort of flip-floppy, a little bit hypocritical, maybe a bit soft?
I just don't think. I suppose it does risk that, but I think on the flip-flop thing, I think most people either won't remember or care that this whole thing started with his idea to ban TikTok, and he obviously doesn't care that he's changed his mind on that. So the soft on China thing, possibly, but if he comes in on day one and like slaps massive tariffs on China, that will sort of overshadow, or outshine the TikTok thing. So I don't know. I'm not sure that would be too bad for him.
Yeah, and I think quite a lot of this depends on how much you think the electorate buys into the American political classes like battle with China that they're clearly very invested in. Yeah. But whether or not the sort of like your average TikTok user, your median voter, really is enthusiastic about banning TikTok on sort of like national security grounds vis-a-vis China is definitely an open question. Naja, do you think Trump wins from this politically?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not too sure. I think it is like, he's enacted this. Well, he's helped restore TikTok before he's even been inaugurated. I think so many things are going to be happening in the next 100 days. It's going to be completely pushed down.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Down the pile of things that are probably coming. But I mean, with the whole flip-floppy thing, this is typical Trump in a sense. I think he's done multiple U-turns in the past on certain policies.
And he does seem to get away with it.
And he does seem to get away with it. I think Trump's supporters maybe find it, I don't know, not charismatic, but a bit like, oh, he's done it again. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, very fair. No, I think you're right. And I think that's the main point. I do think you're correct in that, like, the main point is that so much, it matters, what happens in the next 100 days matters so much more, or even the coming days matters so much more than what we've just seen.
Yeah.
And you're right that the sense that people have of his China policy, whether or not he's like seen as being strong or weak on China, will depend more on whether or not he engages in like a full-throated trade war than banning TikTok.
Yeah. Can I jump in on the last thing on the US? I want to address my shirt and say, because it was pointed out to me before we started, that it looks like I'm wearing a USA shirt. It's not USA, it's Busan, South Korea. I don't want people thinking I'm sort of partisan in either way, but yeah. Although it's a blue USA shirt, so maybe that would be something else.
Messages are all over the place here. It's very flexible. You could just sort of tear it open. Different sort of podcast to be fair. Anyway, is that everything on Trump?
I think so.
Yeah. Convinced that he's a bit of a winner?
Yeah.
He's
president now.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Naja, who is your winner of the week?
My winner of the week is French President Emmanuel Macron. That being said, last week the left-wing coalition alliance essentially failed to oust Macron's new PM. I think he's been the PM now for around like 45 days or 30 days, or something like a month, just over a month. Obviously taking over Michel Barnier, and I think it's the first big win for Macron in a while. The fact that this new PM has yet to face some kind of substantial criticism is quite big for Macron, following the turbulency of the past few months in France. And basically how it all went down was essentially the new popular bloc is made out of 4 parties. 3 out of the 4 parties decided to go ahead with the no confidence vote, but the Socialists, which is the second largest party, they decided to opt against it. I think not to abstain, but to refuse. So that's a big blow as well to the leader of the Left Alliance. I'm not going to try and pronounce his name.
Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Yeah.
And now the left is looking significantly weakened, which is good news for Macron, and it's good news going forward with the hopeful talks around the budget, seeing as the left now, and the Socialists specifically, seem to be able to want to talk and have negotiations with the new PM. That's kind of good signs. Calm waters ahead for Macron.
Yeah.
We'll see though.
Yeah, very good. So I was going to say, this isn't the first time that the French left have fallen out. Was this sort of inevitable, do we think?
Yeah, I think so.
You think so?
The last few years they've fallen out, reunited countless times, and it was inevitable. I mean, they fell out quite heavily over like Ukraine and Gaza, and then the snap elections last year forced them to come together again. And since then, they stood pretty strong together on the formation of a new government. But now, I think it was inevitable that they were going to fall apart, especially as you've got the socialists, which, formerly the centre-left party in France, one of the main two parties, collapsed to, really significant lows in the last decade or so. They're starting to see a way back to becoming a more sort of viable political force.
I think that starts in the European Parliament elections, doesn't it? They had a surprisingly good showing and headed up by, is it Raphael Glucksmann? Is Glucksmann's name?
Yeah, that was during the European Parliament election. I don't know who actually leads them now officially, but you can sort of see this all with a view to the 2027 presidential election.
Yeah.
Because they want one of their own to be the candidate of the left. But I mean, I think what will probably happen is you'll get multiple left-wing candidates and they'll all split the vote, and then you'll get a Macronist candidate and then Le Pen or Bardella or someone. So I think it's a risk for them. Then the other alternative thing, actually, if they have new snap elections later this year, which is another possibility, will the left reunite again ahead of those, or will they say enough's enough?
And do you think this means that the budget will pass?
I don't actually know. Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that, because Francois Bayrou, I don't know how you say it, Bayrou, has indicated that he's willing to sort of walk back the pension reform, which was the main point of contention. The fact he's open.
Is that why he's more palatable to the left?
Yeah,
than
definitely.
Barnier was.
Yeah, and he's also sort of from the political left originally versus Barnier. So yeah, it looks like it's got a better chance of survival. He also has signalled that he doesn't want to use Article 49.3 to force through the budget, but if he can't pass the budget, he might have to, and then that will cause a whole crisis.
Do you think this is in part because at least parts of the left have decided that this actually isn't in their electoral interests?
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons I was always pessimistic about the budget getting passed is that it looked like the self-interested thing, the electorally optimal thing to do if you were not the Macron's, one of Macron's parties, Macron's party, coalition, was to stay in opposition essentially and sort of rail against Macron until the next elections inevitably happen. Then you get to be like, look at me, I hate Macron too, because he is very unpopular at the moment for just weird reasons. And why, do you think that there has been a sort of change in that calculation? Do you think they've decided that actually it now looks a bit petty, maybe?
I think the socialists have been very clear that they're not saying he has free reign to do what he wants. Now they're saying we won't immediately topple him. We'll let them do some things and then we'll react. And at any point we could topple them if we want to. But I think they've realised that is a better strategy, because when you have a new government form, if your immediate response is to topple it before it's even done anything, and you do that multiple times, that does start to look like you're the one causing the disruption.
Macron playing 4D chess over here.
We'll
he
see.
wins in the end.
We'll see.
The last thing I was going to say is I don't know how much this is the case, but I do think that some of the strain on the left-wing lines is probably down to the fact that France Unbound, what's the acronym?
LFI.
LFI. Mélenchon's party. It's very much a Mélenchon outfit. And he's actually getting pretty old now. I don't know how viable he's in his late 70s.
Yeah.
I don't know how viable a candidate he really is for the presidential election in 2029 or whatever it is. And I think the socialists have probably decided that they might be better off, instead of backing another Mélenchon bid, they might be having their own go at it. I think it'd be very interesting to see whether or not French politics does stabilise in any meaningful way. Because you mentioned it in passing a second ago, the fact that the socialists eventually gave way. Well, the French left fractured basically beginning in the 80s and then accelerating in the 90s. And whether or not they sort of return to, they're not even. It's not even like a three-party system at the moment. But
it's 4 or 5.
It's sort of like 3 vague coalitions, but there are obviously splits within those coalitions. And whether or not it returns a slightly more stable footing in the way that you're sort of seeing in places like Spain, where just you voters have slightly given up on the chaos that is implied by a very, very pluralistic system.
Although that being said, in Spain, new chaos as well.
Is there new chaos?
Well, I guess.
No.
It seems
because Pedro Sanchez.
He went down last week. Yeah.
As entrants may, further destabilise his government.
Okay.
But we'll see.
Well, I was desperately reaching for an international analogy, and you've shot it down appropriately.
No. That being, if we're going for the international analogy, I saw as well that in Germany, the left are set to be completely wiped out. The left part, Die Linke,
Die Linke?
completely wiped out. And Sarah Wagenknecht is like...
Well, that's another good example of a country that used to have a sort of like two-party system, and it has just like fractured massively. And I guess the question there in all of those cases is like whether or not the electorate does sort of consolidate around a couple of parties, basically for like self-interested electoral reasons, because obviously if you're on the left and your vote is split between like 8 parties, you're just not going to get that much sort of like, parliamentary representation as you would otherwise. And whether or not that those incentives in basically the structural electoral system eventually forces voters to consolidate around 2 main parties, and it might not. But I think that it's an interesting open question with the French one, because I think that you can see on the left that different parties are basically realizing that the sort of coalition politics that they've like endured for really quite a long time is just suboptimal from their perspective, and that they're quite popular, but it's probably best if they have one party that sort of monopolizes that like left-wing vote in the way that they used to, and whether or not you can return to that sort of politics. I think it's very much an open question. I genuinely don't know what the answer is. You say? No?
Well, no. I mean, no. I was just thinking that. Do you guys think that there's just the left in general kind of fracturizing all across? Maybe I don't know if you can say all across Europe, but in loads of different cases. Does that speak to like the left in general? How the left is currently in the world, like in this like current global climate, and all the politics that have kind of really fractured like specific issues, specific topics, Gaza, Ukraine, the green policies have just completely, I think, not destroyed, but weakened a kind of united left that have a stance on a united stance on things. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think that's related to this situation.
No, I think it's very related. I think that, and you're right to point out that it's an international trend, isn't it? It's not just that in France that left parties end up like, well, sort of like, I think what actually happens is the establishment left party fails its voters, especially on the more like radical left-wing fringes, and that provides a support base for. But what were you going to say, Roy?
I was going to say, I mean, I think that also has happened to the establishment centre-right parties. And, some exceptions, but it's sort of from both sides. There's these sort of rising.
I do think in lots of ways, I think it's hard. I think you see the fracturing a bit more on the left, though. I think that's slightly more universal.
Yeah, it feels like left-wing parties, groups in general, just do feel more prone to public infighting than right-wing ones. Possibly that's massively anecdotal. Yeah, exactly. But I wonder if people if people agree or disagree with that. But
I do think that it's definitely an international trend, like the fracturing of the left. I think most maybe interesting is I think the fracturing of the left in lots of European countries begins a bit earlier than the fracturing of the right does.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And I think in some ways it's the fracturing of the fracturing of the right does feel fair. That does seem, we see the rise of like the far right across Europe. That seems to be the fracturing of the right.
Sure, but I think with the right, a lot of these centre right parties we see this trend. They are moving further and further to the right to accommodate
there's not many
politics, and you don't get that with the left, really.
Yeah, the centre-left parties aren't shifting left to try and sweep up. Yeah.
Although I do think that some of it is that I think I don't want to get, this is going to get too pretentious, but one of the things I do think is I think it's very hard to be a centre-left party in a sort of, for lack of a better term, like a globalised market system, because quite a lot of left-wing politics, at least in a sort of like post-war European context, is about like taxing the rich and like redistributing wealth, and that becomes really quite difficult when basically there's the short-term capital flight and people can move money out of a country, but also when, for like lots of deep structural reasons, your like government relies on international finance to finance your borrowing, right? And then that just markets generally bias against left-wing governments. So when left-wing governments come in, their borrowing costs go up and they're almost immediately pushed into some sort of financial crisis. I think you do see that a little bit, by the way, in the French experience, that is it Mitterrand is the socialist in the 80s.
Did austerity basically after.
Exactly. And Hollande tries something quite similar, and it turns out that like his very progressive taxation, it definitely underperformed, it definitely underwhelmed. And I think that the French experience does demonstrate that actually it's just very hard to enact left-wing politics when A, you sort of rely on like international markets to finance your government, and then B, also when people can just like shift their money out of a country. And that's actually like a relatively new state of affairs, until really the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the 70s, there are pretty stringent capital restrictions, and one of the reasons is that the architect of Bretton Woods systems, John Maynard is one of them, is really worried about this like very precise problem about the fact that if you can flow money about across borders all over the place, it makes left-wing politics really, really difficult. And sorry.
No, I'm listening.
No,
I guess I was going to say very random and like analogy, but I guess with Cuba and them completely being like shut off from the rest of the world.
Best, honestly, the best
and they've got their left-wing politics like done quite well.
I don't know how well that works, but the best example of a country where there are still capital flows in like a modern financial environment is China. China is just the only real country where there are like capital controls are almost hard to imagine in a modern context. Because like these days, we're used to be able to like PayPal money, across borders and just zip, zip, zap. But it didn't used to be that way for starters. And China is the only country where that sort of still has functioning capital controls. And that's just because it's the 4 big banks in China are state-owned, which means that as long as you bank with them, the way you move your money back is just monitored by the CCP. And I just do think that represents like a really difficult challenge for the left. And I think you sort of, again, you see it literally right now in France in that a lot of French voters, actually been voting for both the National Rally and the New Popular Front, have voted for parties that want to spend more money and promise in some part to finance that by redistributing wealth. And the bond markets just won't accept it. And that's just like a really difficult democratic situation. It really, if voters just can't get what they want because of international finance, it's just a really toxic politics. And also if international finance essentially just like squeezes the space for political debate, like squeezes the sort of like the Overton window, then I just think that it's just not a very nice politics is what I'm getting at here. Yes, anyway, fun stuff. Yeah.
So Macron is going up.
Macron is going up. I'm very, very sorry to the audience, but the audience, you guys did pick the Greenland PM with very, very understandable reasons, but we're not going to put him on the board because he's not going to move up or down apart from in the context of, well, maybe if like Trump buys Greenland or if Greenland gets independence from Denmark. But we think he's going to be a slightly redundant addition to the board, no disrespect to Greenland. So we're going for the second placed audience pick, which is Ulf Kristersson, who is the Prime Minister of Sweden. He's been around for quite a while, actually, hasn't he? Ulf Kristersson, a couple of years now.
Sticking at it.
Yeah, good on him. Do we think he's going up or down?
I'm going to move him down, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I've done some limited research. There's all sorts of things that you can say, but the things that stood out to me from that's happening in Sweden at the moment relating to him is this scandal involving his national security advisor and also close friend, a guy called Henrik Landerholm, who is... I don't know about what his national security advice is like, but he seems to be prone to misplacing classified documents and items around the place. And that's a scandal that sort of been rumbling on and raises questions about his suitability in the role. And also, it's not just like he's an advisor that was hired. He is a long-time close friend of the Prime Minister, which always makes it awkward when you've got these, are you not firing this person because, he's your friend? Then there's these new revelations that this guy, Henrik Landerholm, used taxpayer money for private trips to Berlin, I think. And you can get a sense of this, when someone, not an elected official, but a sort of behind the scenes official becomes like the focus of media attention and they start digging into things and they bring up all these things. It's always a bad look for the government because, you don't want that to be the headline story.
Yeah, he definitely feels like he's going down.
Yeah.
So of course, I think he's currently the Prime Minister, but I think his party only have something like 25% of seats.
Yeah, it's a minority.
In Parliament. It's a minority government, which is pretty impressive that it's held up for as long as it has, in a way, but it leaves him in a very precarious position, I think it's probably fair to say. And if I remember, while we're just sort of like throwing out random bits of trivia about anything we can remember of Kristersson. Sorry, this part of the podcast is always like this. He also has pretty low approval ratings reliably on those Morning Consult do that sort of like global leader approval rating series. And of course, Kristersson reliably has pretty low approval ratings, unfortunately. Although I do think that in general, Swedish PMs suffer from chronically low approval ratings.
Especially if you're a minority, if you have a minority coalition, you're sort of by default only going to be supported by minority.
Yeah, it's a tough life.
Yeah.
Okay, we're happy putting him down?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done my research too much at all.
Neither have I.
Okay, but he had the whole migration crisis, economic crisis as well the past couple of years.
Oh, of course, that's a good point. Yeah, no, that's very, very true.
Too well.
Yeah, although that's fine. We'll move
down.
Yeah. We're now on to the losers of the week. We are now on to the losers of the week. Rory, who is your loser of the week?
Before I say my person, I think there are a few angles you can look at this story from. And so if people agree or disagree with me, feel free to have a go at me in the comments. I'm ready for that. But I'm moving Benjamin Netanyahu down. It might seem odd given that his ceasefire deal, the ceasefire deal that his government agreed to, was approved, and the Israeli hostages are starting to be returned. It might seem odd to move him down, but I think if we look at the big picture, I think there are reasons why actually he looks less powerful than he perhaps was before. Firstly, we mentioned it earlier, but the idea that Trump sort of forced his hand into accepting this ceasefire deal, I think that is a bad look for him. He and parts of his cabinet have been resisting a ceasefire for quite some time, and now he's agreed to it. And I think going forward, that relationship between him and Trump remains to be seen exactly what it'll be like. But if Trump is a very transactional person, and that can be used to other people's, what's the opposite of a benefit? To people's detriment, yes. And Netanyahu, I think, has suffered in this case at least. And then just generally, if we look at the war in Gaza and try and think about what Israel has achieved from it, I don't think that Israel has achieved a huge amount. I mean, they wanted to, Hamas is still in Gaza, it will still play a role in the governing of Gaza. And when you saw the hostages be returned, there were these dozens and dozens and dozens of armed Hamas militants there on a bit of a display of force that makes you think, well, these guys are still there. That was one of the main and sort of major goals of Israel, and they haven't achieved that. So that's why I'm moving him down.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's sort of, again, we have to wait and see how present Hamas still are in Gaza. But I think you're right. If they are still very much present, that really will hurt Netanyahu. I think. Naja, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree definitely. Also, it's been so long, and even though ceasefire has been agreed on, there is no plan for the governance of Gaza afterwards. Obviously, well, not obviously, but Netanyahu, a few more Arab leaders, Trump, they don't want Hamas in control of Gaza anymore. But there hasn't been any kind of alternative option. Netanyahu hasn't nor his cabinet have come up with any plan for the governance of Gaza going forward. So that's just even more problems for him, down the line. Also, I think, I don't know if you mentioned as well, but after he announced the ceasefire is going ahead, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he's resigned from the cabinet, I think.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah. So, this was going to happen. Everyone saw that coming. And then obviously if there's further resignations, very likely that, I don't know, well, actually, I'm not sure, but snap
we could get to that point.
Could get to that point, maybe not soon, but
yeah. But then we have a caveat of polling now, despite what it looked like, I don't know, a year ago or something. His party looks like it will win the next elections, which is a remarkable.
Well, they won a plurality.
It will be the largest,
non-outright majority,
largest party. I mean, his political fortunes may not have been completely reversed, but
I think the moment looks like he'll survive. As in, there won't be a complete collapse government. But I think it all goes back to what we were saying before. It just depends on what happens in the next. At the moment he looks relatively safe because only Ben-Gvir has resigned, and actually he's still got enough support in Parliament to hold up. But I think if you're right, and it does still look like Hamas are very much present in the Gaza Strip, they've basically just been hiding away.
Yeah.
Then I think he really will struggle. And the other thing I think people sort of forget is that quite a lot of the reason that Benny Gantz, who was once seen as like the alternative to Netanyahu, his support collapsed, is that he was seen in lots of ways as like an American lackey. He was seen as if he was taking orders from the Biden administration. And I think in a sense there's a bit of a risk of that for Netanyahu, in that it looks like he's just doing what Trump told him to do. And the last thing also I say is that I think there's this constant structural issue for Netanyahu, right? In that Trump does want a deal in Israel. He just he wants to somehow solve that problem. And I think you saw in the first term is that there just is not a deal that it will be palatable, a sort of permanent state of affairs that will be palatable to this Israeli government. And just because the more right-wing elements of the Israeli government have some pretty maximalist objectives, and they're not going to sort of draw the lines in the sand and sort of settle for something that falls short of that. They're going to just try and keep pushing and see if over time they can achieve their more maximalist objectives. And I think that is a really structural issue for Netanyahu, because I think Trump will be pushing for some sort of okay, this is what we're doing. And Netanyahu, at least the right of that government, will just resist until the last end. I think you did see this in the first term when he came up with that Gaza peace plan that was actually quite favourable to the Israelis. But then the right of the Israeli cabinet basically rejected it and told him to stuff it. Yeah, I do think he's going down. Although I think he's going down for this week.
Yeah.
But I do think if you zoom out a little bit,
Yeah.
and you just go back to October 7th, the fact that he's still in place,
Yeah.
is just
I was
quite
so
incredible.
sure he'd be gone.
Yes, it's absurd.
Yeah.
And his popular, I mean, it's still not that popular, but it has sort of held up, stabilised at whatever it is. I think look at 30-something seats from the most recent polling, which is just quite incredible. I think it was basically the only thing that most people were certain of.
That once the war ends, he's
Netanyahu
done.
would be done.
But apparently not.
Yeah, and I think also the other thing that will sort of make or break it will be how the rest of the region reacts to it. And I think going back to what you said actually in the Trump section, so much will depend on basically whether or not Trump offered him some sort of concession that only becomes apparent later on. You know what I mean? Again, maybe a strike on Iran, maybe sort of accelerated normalization with the Saudis. That's another pretty good option. Although I'm not really sure whether or not the Israeli electorate would appreciate that per se, but. Yeah, I think we would have to wait and see.
Yeah, but he's on the board, so he can move wherever we want to put him.
Lucky us.
Was that a new pick?
I think he is new on the board. Yeah, somehow.
Despite being the most most influential. That is a code of reference to our upcoming magazine. Oh, I can't do this.
That was great.
Thank you. Okay, fine. Go on. Which is on the 25 most influential people in the world. Benjamin Netanyahu is. I mean, I can't remember quite exactly where he is.
He's not the most, we can tell you that much.
Yeah, he's not the most, but that's the sort of cliffhanger. If you want to find out, you have to buy the magazine. But he's up there, remember that. And if you buy the magazine, you will also get access to, or the premium version magazine, a secret podcast where we have a very heated argument. I mean, it's unduly heated. You know? We're not very heated normally, about whether or not he should be up on the board. Anyway, that is... Benjamin Netanyahu.
That is, yeah.
That's BB.
Done.
So who is your loser of the week, Nadia?
My loser of the week is Russian President Vladimir Putin. The reason being is currently his energy revenues to finance his war in Ukraine are expected to significantly fall. This is largely due to new US sanctions targeting Russian oil companies, which are the strictest sanctions yet. And that's not great for Putin because so far he's managed to circumvent these sanctions and keep reaping in the revenues of the oil and gas industries.
Yeah.
And secondly, a new report was released last week. We did a video on this, on that essentially a lot of the money that was reported that was being used to finance the war in Ukraine wasn't largely coming from Russia's state budget, but rather banks were Russian banks in a sense were being forced to give loans to loads of defense companies, defense industries, even if they were credit risks. If they were
at preferential rates, basically.
Preferential rates. And that's been going on for the past 2 years, and that's kind of new information, which kind of does significantly undermine the kind of Putin's Russia's kind of the figures on where the money for the war is going, where it's coming from. And now that this has been revealed, there is a possible risk that these banks in the future may default, or there's credit risks everywhere because they're giving all these preferential loans to companies that aren't really stable, or who knows what, are relatively new, whatever. So that's not good for the Russian economy, but we'll see going forward.
I was going to say, one of the other things that I think you've talked about in the past as well is that he's losing at least some of his European allies. He's got a handful of European,
yes,
not
this
allies.
Is true.
He's got Orban, he's got
Vucic.
Yeah, and Vucic, everyone's favourite.
Forgot about Vucic. That's another thing as well. I mean, this is not part of the 90 seconds, but...
No, we're past 90 seconds now.
Add to the conversation.
Yeah.
So Gazprom was sanctioned by the US, but also it's mini entities that I don't know what the exact word is for that, but
I think that is a technical term actually.
So Serbia, Serbia's kind of their main oil gas industry is 50% owned by Russia, but because of these new sanctions that I just mentioned,
it's because of the sanctions.
Yes, because of those sanctions.
I didn't know that.
They're going to be forced to have to buy off the Russian. Asset of it.
So Serbia has to buy the Russian.
Buy the Russians out.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, which is
that's interesting.
kind of a big thing because the main political weight Putin carried in Serbia, which is kind of the biggest ally of Russia's in Europe, was gas and the gas industries.
Oh, okay.
So that's a pretty big thing as well. Yeah. video coming out on it soon. So
stay tuned.
I'll watch that.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, we also, I don't want to rehash an argument we had on the secret podcast that I teased earlier, but we had that conversation about how I think his cultural influence has really waned. I think you used to get, do you not sort of agree? There used to be a thing where people would sort of style themselves as Putin-style strongmen. You know, people always used to phrase like strong leader around him. And I don't know if people do as much. You know, I
think war criminals now.
But like the Putin sympathizers, I think frame themselves more as like pro-peace people as opposed to like pro-Putin people.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of kind of Eastern European allies definitely kind of still go for that kind of pro-peace Putin, but I think a lot of the West, I think Germany, France, and maybe like a couple of years ago, Putin was just kind of seen as this like, a bit dodgy, but he's a strong guy.
That's actually a good point. You forget, France as well. Le Pen quite consciously would talk about, and Salvini would obviously talk about how Putin was a strong leader, and now they're still sort of wary of Ukraine, but it's all framed in pro-peace terms, pro-Putin terms.
Yeah, so that is interesting. This cultural significance, like you said, has pretty waned. Yeah.
Rory, you agree? Putin down?
Yeah.
Not gonna back his corner?
No. I do remember in the last iteration of this podcast where quite a few times I feel like I end up putting Putin up. People like Putin and Kim Jong-un up on the board. So it's nice to have him going down.
Betraying your real biases there. Yeah. The audience are constantly guessing where Rory's political leanings.
But yeah, I can't believe he's not on the board.
Yeah,
it's good to have him on.
The other thing I'll say is welcome. The other thing I was going to say is that Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury pick, there's always been some ambiguity over what Trump's Ukraine policy will be. And remember, we've talked about a few other videos, that basically the Ukrainians said they felt reassured by their first few points of contact with Trump. But Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury pick, he had his Senate hearing or confirmation hearing on Friday, I think it was, and sometime in the past few days. Anyway, he was asked specifically about the question of like Russian sanctions, and he basically said that he would support and that Trump probably would pursue stronger sanctions on Russia if that's what was required. And I think it's yet another bit of quite good evidence that actually Trump's Ukraine policy is not going to be as sort of anti-Ukraine as I think some people like originally worried, And there have been other reports with Trump officials basically saying that they don't expect the deal to come obviously on day one, somewhat unsurprisingly. But I think the fact that they're not going to rush for a deal, they're going to sort of like negotiate properly as it were, and the fact that Scott Bessent is saying that they will escalate sanctions, I think that does all suggest that actually America's sort of Ukraine policy is not just going to be very like pro-Putin, as I think it was sometimes caricatured back in the day. Anything else on Putin? No? We're happy on him?
Yeah.
Okay, that takes us very smoothly onto the final part of our podcast, which is the biggest loser and the biggest winner. We start with the biggest winner, yeah?
Yeah.
So our two candidates are Trump and
Macron.
Oh, no.
We know who I'm going for. So who is going to go for Trump?
I'm going to vote for Trump. It's got to be Trump.
Yeah.
Don't take that out of context, what I just said. I don't like that at all.
Yeah, I think it's got to be Trump, doesn't it? He does feel quite triumphant. And while we're talking about like the cultural significance of Putin, I think that Trump feels like he's won a massive cultural victory.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The cultural vibe shift has just been
insane.
It's been so massive. I was thinking about it a little bit. Don't want to get him too excited.
I was thinking.
But I think some of it might actually be because Biden left such a cultural void. So especially towards the end, do you know what I mean? In a way that I don't think previous Democrats have done.
That's true, yeah.
I bet Obama had a vibe. He had a cultural like.
Obama's vibes.
He's got good vibes. Yeah, exactly. And I think that Biden was just absent towards the end, and I don't think Harris had like enough time. It wasn't an ageist gist, but he was. And I do think that explains something because I've been like really shocked by it. I think you can overstate the magnitude of Trump's actual victory. It's only 1.5 points in the popular vote, and we're all like acting as if he won 75% of the vote, and now YMCA on stage has danced around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he is a winner.
I do wonder though with the cultural shift that do you think the I don't know who it would be like the celebrities and the companies that have sort of gone all in on this shift to Trump are slightly overextending in that, like if you characterize the election as being like a response to economic issues, like it's not that the US electorate just suddenly became really conservative, like socially conservative. I think a lot of like Facebook, for example, and maybe Facebook's a bad example, but I do think it's easy to sort of accidentally think that the shift towards Trump is that the whole country has socially got more conservative, rather than that possibly being secondary to the economic issues. But
I know what you mean, but my instinct is no, and I think there's two things. I mean, one of it's just court politics, right? In that there's the self-interested thing, you want to get on the right side of Trump because he'll be nice to you. But I think also some of it is that one of the reasons that companies have been wary of pivoting too aggressively to Trump back in 2016 or like 2020 is that like there was this, so much of the sort of like left's cultural narrative relied on the assumption that like that's the pro-Trump crowd were a minority. You know what I mean? So much of the discourse was framed around them being like extremist radicals, like minority. And I just think that once the plausibility of that premise evaporated, once it became clear that like, oh, this actually isn't a minority opinion, the sort of like the deterrence that the left was able to exert on cultural issues just sort of faded away, and now it's more like you just can't be punished as much for sort of pivoting to Trump. So there's just less of an incentive not to, as it were. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and there really doesn't seem like there was a big resistance movement against Trump. I mean, it didn't do much, but sort of a public and vocal resistance against Trump in his first term. But it just doesn't seem like that's materialized at all.
No, I do think quite a lot of it's because of that whole thing. I think there was some of the things that motivated that like resistance lib vibe was just that the idea that they were quietly a majority. That this sort of electoral system is anti-majoritarian, and that it's, I don't know, sort of very passionate Trump voters outvoting the silent majority. But I think that narrative has sort of collapsed with the election result, and I think that's just left the left in a little bit of a limbo.
I also think there's just so many things that have happened in the past 4 years as well, that like we had COVID, and we had Ukraine and Gaza now, and Trump's coming here. Like, even if you're not like a radical, you're getting this guy who's saying, I'm going to end all wars in like an hour or something like that. Even that is like enough to convince like some people who aren't necessarily Republicans or extremists, or people who voted for Biden, Kamala first time round, who like, disillusioned with their kind of politics as well.
So you love Putin and you love Trump.
No,
so
this is not true.
That's the takeaway here.
This is not true.
But I genuinely think it's a very, very good point. And I think also what the last few years has done is sort of pivoted voter attention away from cultural issues, which were the sort of quite dominant, especially during the pandemic, towards a combination of foreign policy and economic issues, where I just think that it's some ways less morally, it's just morally loaded in a different way. Anyway, enough of that. That's enough of our wangling. You're not here for that.
Trump's the biggest winner.
Trump's the biggest winner. Who is the biggest loser?
Putin.
Putin or Netanyahu?
Putin, Netanyahu, or Ulf Kristersson. That would feel harsh. I think Putin.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? I was going to go Bibi.
Yeah.
I think it remains to be seen, but I think in this particular moment, Bibi just looks a lot weaker.
Yeah.
Do you not see what I mean a little bit?
I mean, I put him on the board, I suppose. I should do, really. Yeah.
Nigel, what do you think?
I do agree. Bibi. Yeah.
Bibi? Yeah, I don't know if we should be calling him Bibi.
No.
Yeah, no.
So we're going Bibi?
Netanyahu.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah.
Is that...
if we all agree, he goes down 2.
So I think Trump goes down 2 as well.
He goes up 2.
They go up 2. Crazy. Lucky dude.
Rocketing up to the top.
And inaugurated today. He's just winning today.
Another feather in the cap. Yeah, okay.
And then Putin down 2.
Netanyahu, you mean?
Sorry, Netanyahu
down 2. Yeah. Okay, well, that is everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the host. I should know. So that is everything. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we hope to see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice.